I heard there was somebody with a clock up front somewhere. Oh, there we go. It's a countdown. It's intense. I have 53 minutes, which means we'll be here for another 2 hours. Okay, here's a question. It doesn't have a name. Oh, here it is. Sue Raby. Raby? Raby. You're right here. Well, thank you. Would you like to ask the question, or would you like me to read it? I'll read it. We have not heard much about illegal immigration of children. Oh, it's on the, look at the technology. We have not heard much about the illegal immigration of children. Has this stopped? What did we do to control or slow it down? Boy, 2 hours might not be long enough. I mentioned that I used to do counter-drug operations. We used to bust $2 billion worth of cocaine every year on the high seas, and this is something that became very personal to me because I saw the catastrophic consequences of not securing the border. The drug cartels that we fought brought the drugs to northern Mexico because that was the easy access into the United States. That's where the drugs were going. Mostly cocaine is what we were after. But when the price of cocaine went down, the shipment of young girls in the slave trade went up. This is just the reality that we were dealing with out there. So here is the situation. Because we are unwilling to secure the southern border, we have transnational criminal organizations in northern Mexico that are securing the southern border. So here's what happens. And this is why I got so involved with this. A lot of people in this room are probably aware that I tried to visit the HHS facility at Fort Sill and I got rejected. Raise your hand if you were aware of that. That's good to see. So here's what happened. I heard about this. I was going down to Fort Sill to talk to the commanding general there about the fires brigades and air defense artillery and force restructuring under the sequester and how we're going to be able to fight our country's battles and be ready and how we're going to do training for our military forces. And at the end of our meeting, I said, I'd like to visit the HHS facility where the unaccompanied alien children are staying, the UACs. And he said, look, you can do that. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to go with you. And I said, why not? He said, well, it's not my mission. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to go. And we went. And interestingly, they told me I wasn't allowed in. And I asked him, I said, I need to talk to somebody up your chain of command. I said, this is federal property. I'm a federal representative of the people. This is a federal mission. I think it's appropriate that I would have access since there are children behind this gate, many of which the stories are horrible. Tragic stories of abuse. And interestingly, they said, no, you can't come in. They had me talk to their communications director, which I don't know why that's in their chain of command, but that's who they wanted me to talk to. They said, you can come back in 21 days. Here's the reality. I am not one, and everybody in this room is probably aware of that, I am not one who, at every chance I get, I run to the media because I want as much media attention as possible. That's not what I do, and I don't see that as my mission in the United States Congress. But in this particular case, the Founding Fathers gave us a First Amendment for a purpose. And I said, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we're using the First Amendment to get access to that facility because I am not waiting 21 days. In the next 2 weeks, thank you. In the next 2 weeks, we did 72 interviews. And I was tired. But we were still going. And Cheryl Kaufman, my communications director, she was working every bit as hard as I was. Thank you for that, wherever you are, Cheryl. But at the end of the day, after about a week and a half of these interviews over and over, we got a letter from the Obama administration. HHS. Hey, we'd like to take you on a tour of our HHS facility at Fort Sill. How nice of them. And interestingly, their letter also said that you can come, but you can't ask any questions. You can't talk to the staff. You can't talk to the contractors, and you can't talk to the children. You can't talk to the medical staff. To which we sent a reply, we were going to treat your restrictions the way the president treats the law. I take it there's not a lot of fans here. We're going to treat your restrictions the way the president treats the law as a suggestion. Here is who we expect to talk to, and here are the questions we're going to ask, and we sent them the questions. And interestingly, when we got in the facility after 2 weeks instead of 3 weeks, we started asking the questions. And here's what I was concerned with. The reports at a Lackland Air Force Base were as many as a third of the children had been abused. And I asked the question when we got into Fort Sill, how many children here have been abused? Well, we don't have those numbers. Well, go to the next person. How many children have been abused? Well, we don't have those numbers. How many children have been abused? We don't have those numbers. Finally grabbed a contractor. How many children have been abused? Well, it's over 25%. Somebody else says it's well over 25%. Here's what's happening with this scenario that was happening leading up to the summer. A lot of people have come from Central America, and they have been smuggled into the United States illegal. I'm talking about adults. I'm not talking about children. I'm talking about adults. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. And once they get here, they start making money, and then they hire coyotes to go down and pick up their family members, their children, and bring them to the United States. The problem is this. The GAO reports that we only have operational control over 44% of our southern border. And that's not where they come across. They come across the 56% where we don't have operational control. And because we don't have operational control, these transnational criminal organizations, organized crime in northern Mexico, they have control. And when the children get to northern Mexico, their options are as follows. You pay us $10,000 and you get across. You don't pay us $10,000 and we're going to figure out a way to make $10,000 by you, then you're going to go across. And so they force the children into slave labor. They force the children into prostitution. In many cases, the children died, and I'm not talking about a few. And in many cases, the children they went from being smuggled, where they are complicit, to being trafficked, where they are not complicit. So the children that came across the border, in many cases, had been abused. And some of them had lost their friends on the way. In northern Mexico, estimates are anywhere from 70,000 to 100,000 dead bodies in northern Mexico from the last 10 years. And we're unwilling to secure the southern border. And so we're going to let transnational criminal organizations in northern Mexico control the southern border. This was the concern. This is why I wanted to get into the HHS facility. When I got in, this is what I discovered. It confirmed my worst fears. And that's where we are. Now, ultimately, the humanitarian thing to do for the children is not leave the southern border open and have transnational criminal organizations controlling who comes into our country. The humanitarian thing to do is to secure the border and make sure that people down in Central America understand if you come, you're not going to get in, and if you do get in, you're not going to be able to stay. And understanding that, we can quell this crisis. Now, ultimately, as the summer went on, it got a lot hotter, and so the numbers started going down. We also worked extremely hard to pass a bill, and there's so much to talk about. We passed a bill in the House of Representatives in August, and what we did is we said this. The challenge is not the children. The children are the victims in this. The challenge are the parents who are continuing to come across the border and then hire coyotes to bring their children. That's the challenge. So how do we quell the activity of coming across the border? Well, we need more border security, customs and border protection. We passed a bill in the House of Representatives that did that. We said we need more immigration and custom enforcement, ICE. We passed a bill in the House of Representatives that did that. We said that if you're a governor in a southern state and you send your National Guard to the border to secure it, you need to be reimbursed by the federal government. And we passed a bill we passed a bill in the House of Representatives to do exactly this. And we also said that the children that have come here that are victims, they need to be sent home in a very humane fashion where they can be served by their home countries. And we said to the extent that these countries continue to send people to the United States, that every dollar we spend is going to be taken out of their foreign aid. We passed this in the House of Representatives over the August recess, and we stayed late. Instead of coming home, we stayed late in the House of Representatives to get this done because it was the right thing to do for the children, it's the right thing to do for our national security, and it's the right thing to do for our sovereignty. We sent it over to the Senate, and they were all gone. And the president, at that time, was telling the world that he's going to do an executive action to make 5 to 6 million people that are here illegal immediately legal with an executive action. The Constitution is very clear on this. Congress has the authority to create an uniform rule of naturalization, not the President of the United States. And we just saw it yesterday, as a matter of fact. There's a government website called FedBizOps. Raise your hand if you're familiar with FedBizOps. So this is a government website where if you want to do business with the federal government, you go to this website and you can look at what opportunities are available out there. There is, on FedBizOps right now, from USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, there is a request for a contractor that can provide 34 million guest worker cards. This will be one of the biggest executive action programs that our country has ever done, and they want to be able to, in the first year, do 5 million, and in the second year, do an additional 4 million. The president is telling us what he has planned, and oh, by the way, he's told us himself what he has planned. An executive action to make the people that are here illegally legal. You want to know what's driving the traffic up to our southern border? This is it. And if you want to see mayhem on our southern border, do this action. This will cause mayhem, and we're going to see it. This is a concern. And oh, by the way, it's why you need to go vote. There are people that have come to this country legally. There are people trying to come to this country legally. I believe we are a nation of immigrants. E pluribus unum, of many, one. It is who we are as a nation. I am for legal immigration. I am not for illegal immigration. Man, that clock is getting me. I'm going to say this on the last piece on this, because this is important and it's part of my history and background. We used to interdict, like I said, $2 billion of cocaine every year on the high seas. That cocaine is coming from Central America, South America. It's coming across the border in northern Mexico. And here's the concern. The more we're unwilling to enforce drug law, and by the way, my squadron was cut. That's $2 billion worth of cocaine. My squadron was one of many units across the Department of Defense that used to do counter-drug operations that don't do it anymore. What this means is that billions of dollars are now going to the drug cartels and the criminal organizations that are destabilizing not only northern Mexico, but Central America. And here's the way it works. If you're a politician, if you're a judge, if you're a police officer in northern Mexico, in one of these towns in northern Mexico, you are either, in many cases, on the payroll of the drug cartel or you are dead, which is why there are so many thousands of dead bodies. We're not talking about cartels killing cartels and gangs killing gangs. We're talking about gangs and cartels killing judges, police officers, and politicians. It is how you lose civil society. And when you look at Central America, you hear the president keep talking about how violent it is down there, and they're trying to escape the violence. Well, they're escaping the violence because of the corruption, because there is now more money in the drug cartels and the organized crime than there is in the governments. And when they call the United States of America and they say, we need help, We're losing our civil society. We can't continue to sustain this way. We are going to lose democratic institutions in our hemisphere. And the president says, sorry, we can't help you. Who do they call next? They call the Russians. And they say, we want the Russians to do counter-drug operations for us because we want to keep our civil society in Honduras, Nicaragua, Central America. And the Russians are happy to come, and they provide the ships and the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations. They provide all this on one condition. We want basing in Nicaragua. We want basing for heavy bombers in Nicaragua. Friends, when we abandon the world, when the United States of America says we're not going to honor our obligations, when we stick our head in the sand and pretend like nothing can go wrong, things go wrong. And it's not just happening in our hemisphere, it's happening on the other side of the world. I'm sure there's more questions about that. Okay. And 29 minutes to go. Second question. Oh. No, hold on. This is serious. I want to tell you the truth, and there are people in this room who know the truth. You shouldn't. You shouldn't trust me. You should watch me. You should hold me accountable. If you don't like what I'm doing, let me know. Talk to me. I will share with you my sentiment. And oh, by the way, I am glad this came up. Because I am not afraid of a tough question. And if you don't like what I'm doing, let me know about it. But no, I ran because there was a day when I didn't trust the government myself, and I still don't. I am very skeptical of the government. Okay, I think I've addressed that enough. Let's see, the next question, Terry Mosley. Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East. They have recently told us that the treaty we are negotiating with Iran to limit their nuclear ambitions is not an historic agreement, but rather a historic mistake. How do we get the message across that we do not make this great mistake? There's a lot to say on this one. Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East. And when you think about this negotiation, they call it the Joint Plan of Action, JPA, and then it's the P5 plus 1, United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China. And they're negotiating with Iran to have them, not create a nuclear bomb. Interestingly, under this agreement, they can continue to enrich uranium. Interestingly, under this agreement, their plutonium heavy water reactor in Iraq doesn't have to be shut down. Interestingly, under this agreement, the agreement was this, the Joint Plan of Action. Tell you what, here's the agreement. We're going to lift the sanctions on Iran a little bit. We're going to lift the sanctions on Iran. And in return, they're going to enrich uranium. Explain that to me. And by the way, we're going to negotiate with them for a period of 6 months, and at the end of this negotiation, we're going to have a resolution, and if we don't, the sanctions are going to come right back on. And oh, by the way, we got to the end of those negotiations in July, and the sanctions did not go right back on, but they extended for another 4 months because John Kerry told us that it's better to have no deal than a bad deal. We have a bad deal. Let's go back to the sanctions. We passed a bill. We passed a bill in the House of Representatives to do just that. And of course, Harry Reid in the Senate killed it. The Menendez-Kirk bill in the Senate has 60 co-sponsors, and Harry Reid won't bring it for a vote. So this is a big issue. I think this is important. Now, there are other issues that we have with our best ally in the Middle East, Israel, and that is this. In 2012, there were 21 UN resolutions against Israel. 2012. There were 4 against the rest of the world. 1 against Iran, 1 against North Korea, 1 against Syria, 1 against Myanmar. 2013, there were 22 UN resolutions against Israel. Again, 1 against Iran, 1 against Syria, 1 against Myanmar, 1 against North Korea. And all those were at the UN General Assembly. They passed overwhelmingly against Israel. Just last week, the British Parliament voted to create a Palestinian state side by side with Israel without any negotiations with Israel. This was just last week. 270 some to 12 was their vote in the British Parliament. And when you think about what's happening right now as we sit here, there's a resolution at the UN Security Council, which actually has teeth. It's not to the General Assembly, but there's a resolution at the Security Council that says that the UN is going to create a Palestinian state side by side with Israel without any negotiations with Israel. So this is where we are right now. Now, on the Security Council, there are 15 countries. 9 of them have said they're going to vote for that. One of them, us, is remaining very silent. We should be leading. We should be saying we're going to veto this, and anybody who doesn't veto it is not with us. The European Union has put sanctions on Israel. They are now requiring label for anything that is coming from the West Bank, anything that comes from East Jerusalem, anything that comes from the Golan Heights. There are all these sanctions now from the European Union on Israel. And oh, by the way, you've got John Kerry. I've got a quote here that is very important. John Kerry, failure to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians would damage Israel's capacity to be a democratic state and could lead to more boycotts. Another quote from John Kerry, efforts to delegitimize and boycott it, meaning Israel, efforts to delegitimize and boycott it will grow if the Israel government doesn't agree to a 2-state solution. Another quote from John Kerry, the risks are very high for Israel. People are talking about a boycott that will intensify in case of failure. What John Kerry needs to be saying is that anybody who boycotts Israel is boycotting the United States of America. They are our strongest ally in the Middle East. So just in case you were wondering my philosophy on all this, here's what I would like to share. The land of Judea, Samaria is not occupied territory. It belongs to Israel. There has been a relationship with the people, the Jewish people, and that land that goes back 4,000 years. And anybody who wants to negotiate that away has to negotiate with Israel and only Israel. It cannot be dictated by the United Nations, and it cannot be dictated by Barack Obama or John Kerry. Did I cover that one? If we do allow Iran to get a bomb, it is devastating for Israel. If we allow Israel to accept a Palestinian state side by side dictated by the United Nations or by the United States, and the West Bank becomes a Palestinian state without any negotiations with Israel, Israel will be in a position where its borders are indefensible. And we cannot accept that. All right, the next question. What strategy does the U.S. have for combating terrorists, the terrorist networks at home and abroad? I don't know. Should I read the names on this? I don't want to dime anybody out. Okay, I'm getting a bunch of head shakes. So here's I think the big concern on this one. Where to even begin? I'm gonna go back in time here a little bit, and I want to cover this thoroughly because this is critically important. We're going to go to ISIS, and we're going to go to Al-Qaeda, and a whole lot of other issues. But when you think about the challenges that we're facing, you go back to September 11th, 2001. I was part of the USS Abraham Lincoln. I was on an aircraft carrier. We deployed to the North Arabian Sea. We did combat operations in Afghanistan, and then we rolled over into the Persian Gulf. We did combat operations in Iraq. We did Operation Southern Watch, Operation Shock and Awe, Operation Iraqi Freedom. When we were in Afghanistan, and I say we, I don't mean my air wing or me personally, but when the United States was first in Afghanistan, we damaged a guy named al-Zarqawi. Al-Zarqawi was a lieutenant for Osama bin Laden. Al-Zarqawi was one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The United States military dropped a bomb, damaged him, ribs, leg, whatever the reports were, nobody knew, but he had to get health care, and he went to Baghdad. He went from Afghanistan to Uday Hussein's hospital, that's the son of Saddam Hussein. He went to Baghdad to get his health care. He became healthy, and he became the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. You probably remember AQI. This was al-Zarqawi. I think it was in 2005. I was already home by then. But in 2005, compliments of the United States Air Force, that's hard for me to say as a Navy guy. But compliments of the United States Air Force, 2 500-pound bombs killed al-Zarqawi. But it wasn't before he trained his lieutenant, al-Baghdadi, who became eventually the leader of not only al-Qaeda in Iraq, but an organization called ISIS, or ISIL, or Islamic State. Al-Baghdadi and ISIS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. The authorization for use of military force, and there will be people in this room that disagree with me on this, and that's okay. I'm here to tell you my philosophy. The authorization for use of military force enabled us as a military to not only go after Al-Qaeda, but to go after Al-Qaeda-affiliated forces. And I believe that that authorization entitles our nation to go after ISIS in an extremely robust way because it is an Al-Qaeda-affiliated force. Does that mean that we should not do another authorization specific to ISIS? No, we should. We should do another authorization. I'm fine with that. But the president doesn't want to do what is necessary to thwart this threat. And I want to be clear about what this threat is. Al-Qaeda was a terrorist organization. ISIS is also a terrorist organization, but it has an army. And they are well-trained, well-equipped, well-financed. They're recruiting from throughout the world, including 1,500 plus, that's the most recent estimate. It's probably a whole lot more than that now, from Europe and from England. 100 from the United States of America. And the Obama administration has admitted that a lot of those have come back to the United States of America, and al-Baghdadi has said that the next confrontation will be directly against the United States. This is a challenge, it is a threat, and it needs to be dealt with in a very serious way. Now, here's what happened. The president goes on TV and he gives a speech. And he gives us a whole list of everything that he's not going to do. And he tells our enemies what he's not going to do. And then he tells our enemies what we are going to do. And the targets that we're going to take. Interestingly, there were government buildings and military bases that had been overrun by ISIS. And interestingly, those buildings were empty by the time the bombs fell. This is what we're dealing with. The reality is this. We have to be more serious about this. And this idea, this is what the president came up with was his plan. We're going to train and equip the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. Friends, if there were any Syrian rebels or any moderates in Syria, they're gone by now. The question is, which extreme faction are we going to fund? And the Free Syrian Army has a ceasefire and an agreement with the Nusra Front, which is the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. And when we do kill al-Qaeda factions in Syria, the Free Syrian Army tells us that we've done it, that we're wrong, and they get upset. Look, we are training and equipping people that have extremely limited interests with the United States, if any at all, and they are certainly not sworn to defend our Constitution, the Constitution of the United States. I am for training and equipping the people who are sworn to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, according to this administration, we're going to have 5,000 so-called moderate Syrian rebels that are going to be able to confront ISIS. 2 months ago, I was at the Red State Convention down in Fort Worth, Texas. I know some people here were there. And when I was down there, I talked about ISIS and what a threat they were because they had 15,000 people in their ranks. Now the CIA, as of a month ago, said it was up to 30,000, which means you know it's much more than that. The other day I saw Oliver North on TV, and he said it's over 40,000 in Syria and an equal number in Iraq. And a year from now, we're going to have 5,000 so-called moderate Syrian rebels. Friends, this is serious. The longer we wait, the more suffering is going to have to happen. And I think this is an important point, and I want to make it very clear. Nobody ever confronted the United States of America because we were too strong. It is American weakness that is provocative. And when the President of the United States goes on TV and he tells the enemy everything, we're not imagine FDR going on TV and saying, look, we got this problem in Europe, but we're not going to put any ground troops in there. This doesn't make any kind of sense. And if you look at what works militarily, this doesn't work. So here's what's even worse. We just did in October, we did what's called a continuing resolution to fund the government, which, by the way, denies you your representation. What a continuing resolution does, that 1/3 of federal spending that is discretionary, that is appropriated every year, there's 12 appropriation bills in there. What a CR does is it says, look, Harry Reid won't pass any bills. By the way, this is 5 years in a row where Harry Reid hasn't passed a single spending bill. And so we do CR after CR after CR for 5 years in a row, denying you your representation. The appropriation process is how those of us who serve in Congress have an ability to go on the floor of the House and we argue. We want more spending here. We want less spending here. But when we do a CR, you take 12 appropriation bills, which is how you fund the government, 12 of them, you roll them into one bill, and you say, we're going to fund next year exactly as we funded last year, denying you your representation. Historically, we've done CRs in this country. They are a stopgap measure historically for one appropriation bill for a period of 30 or 60 days until your Congress can get to the appropriation bill where you can once again be represented. Under this president, we do year after year after year of CR after CR after CR, denying you your representation. Because Harry Reid will not pass a spending bill, and the reality is they're doing that because they're afraid that if we did the appropriation bills, if we did them, we could go from Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Energy and Water, Military Construction, Veterans Affairs. We could do transportation, housing and urban development, financial services. We could do all of these appropriation bills and not fund Obamacare. So Harry Reid and Barack Obama can't have that. So their decision is to deny you your representative republic. This is a republic. You elect people to go to Washington, D.C. and represent you. And under a CR, that can't be done. But nobody wants a shutdown. So they know that the CR will pass. So here's what's worse, and this ties to what's happening with ISIS. The president knows that he has to get a Democratic Senate to pass a bill to train and equip so-called moderate Syrian rebels. Well, he can't get that done unless he ties it to a spending bill that if it doesn't pass, the government shuts down. And that's what they did. Well, just so you know, I didn't vote for it. So the question is about the strategy. What do we have for combating terrorist networks at home and abroad? What I would suggest to you is that the strategy, and I want to be really clear, I pray that we do have success here because it's essential, and I want to see us have success. I am under no illusions that as long as the president wants to do what's politically correct and do what's in his best political prospects, I'm under no illusions that we're going to actually do what's necessary to combat the terrorist networks at home and abroad. And I want to say this, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, I can't say it enough. 2006, Senator Obama said these words: a precipitous withdrawal from Iraq would, quote, lead to chaos, terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. He said it would engulf broad swaths of the Middle East and it would endanger the United States of America. That was Senator Obama in 2006. Then he ran for president, and his tone changed. All of a sudden, it was an illegal war. I don't know if he used the word illegal, but it was at least unjust. He kept saying we took our eye off the ball of Afghanistan, and that he was going to be the guy that would end this war. That was his objective. So he becomes president. And his own team in Iraq, Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus, told him, you need to keep 20 to 24,000 troops in Iraq. Because if you don't, we will not be able to sustain the gains of the surge. And by the way, a lot of Americans shed their blood for the gains of the surge. Amen. Thank God for them. His own team said, we've got to have a residual force of 20 to 24,000 troops. We'll go from a counterinsurgency operation where you've got troops on every corner, troops in every school, troops in every grocery store. That's counterinsurgency. You defeat an insurgency with a counterinsurgency. But now we had stability. You had an Iraqi government that was including Kurds and Shia and Sunni. You had an Iraqi army that was Sunni and Kurds and Shia. And we can sustain it if we have a residual force that can do counterterrorism. We can do this gradually, and we can do it in the right way, but we can't pull everybody out right now. That's not the proper thing to do. And everybody told him that if you do this, Maliki, prime minister in Iraq, is going to feel compelled to purge his government of the Sunni factions and to purge the Iraqi army of the Sunnis. And he's going to feel compelled to do that because he's going to feel a risk to himself if he doesn't. And all of a sudden, the Iraqi army will be a Shia militia. And then you're going to have, once again, the Sunnis being radicalized. Before it was Al-Qaeda, now it's ISIS. People told him that. Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus said, we need 20 to 24,000. The president said, no, I promised something else. He said, bring me another plan. They came back with another plan, said 10,000 troops. It will be more risky, which, by the way, that means that more Americans are probably going to have to die. There's going to be more risk with 10,000 troops. We can sustain the gains of the surge with 10,000 troops. And the president said, no, I promised something else. And it was he, in a phone call with Maliki, who said that the status of forces agreement that we come to has to be ratified by the Iraqi parliament. I want to be clear about what a status of forces agreement is. It is how those of us who fight in a foreign country, we fall under American law, not under foreign law. And if you want to have a fighting force, you want your troops under American law. And the status of forces agreement historically is an exchange of diplomatic letters. It is our State Department and their diplomats saying we are going to have this agreement. That's all it is, an exchange of diplomatic letters. And the president, in order to scuttle the agreement, is the one who required that it be ratified by the Iraqi parliament, knowing full well that the Iraqi parliament cannot agree on what day of the week it is, let alone how many troops are going to be in Iraq. So the agreement fell apart. The Americans left, as did all of the allies. By the way, Anybody who says we win it alone is lying to you. I was there. We had 37 nations in our coalition when we started this operation. I want to read to you I think it's important to note that just as the Senator Obama predicted in 2006, when we did have the precipitous withdrawal, it resulted in chaos, terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. It engulfs broad swaths of the Middle East, and it endangers the United States of America. Unquote. He predicted it. He knew it would happen. It wasn't politically expedient at the time to talk about it, and then he did what was politically expedient ultimately. And because of that, our country is being made to suffer. And this is the point I'd like to make. In our country, when it comes to national security and foreign policy, we do not make decisions based on political expediency. We make decisions based on what is in the best interest of our country. I want to read a quote from the president. 2012, this is his quote. "You know I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I said I'd end the war in Iraq, and I ended it. I wonder if the parents of James Foley believe that the war is over. I wonder if the parents of Steven Sotloff believe that the war is over. I wonder if the parents of the 1,500 troops that are there right now that the president calls military advisors, I wonder if their parents think that the war is over. I used to tell folks that nobody likes war less than those of us who have to fight it. But I think I've changed that. Now being a member of Congress and hearing the concerns of my constituents, nobody likes war less than the parents of the people who have to fight it. This is a quote I printed up just today. Remember 2012? You know I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I said I'd end the war in Iraq, and I ended it. 2012. Just recently, here's what the president said. What I just find interesting is the degree to which this issue keeps coming up, as if it was my decision. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. I said I'd end the war in Iraq, and I ended it. As if this was my decision. So here is the reality. Friends, we've got to make sure that we're taking all of these threats very seriously. The lessons of history are clear. The longer we wait, the more sacrifice there will have to be. I'm gonna move on to the next question at this point. Oh, wow. I can't believe we're 2 minutes to go and I'm on this one. I guess it's my town hall, so. Okay, so when you think about these flights out of West Africa, a couple of things. Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea. These are countries where now there have been well over 9,000 people infected with Ebola. These are also countries where there's been over 4,500 deaths. We right now in this country are accepting 150 people from these countries every day coming into the United States of America with visas that have been approved by the United States government, 150 per day. And we also know that the incubation period for Ebola before you even show symptoms is oftentimes as long as 21 days. Which means we also know that there are people that could be traveling to this country right now that could have it and are not presenting symptoms. Now, what are the screening processes? And the question is, do you believe that the TSA can be trusted to identify the people with Ebola? It seems to me that it would be appropriate to temporarily suspend these flights. I want to bring up some of this. We talked about the southern border a little bit earlier, and I saw recently that people on the other side of the aisle were going on the attack about people who were bringing up the southern border as it relates to Ebola and all this stuff. I want to tell you what I pulled down from the Department of Homeland Security website. 2013, 112 people got caught by Customs and Border Protection coming across the southern border from Guinea. 112. 231 got caught coming across the southern border from Liberia. 145 got caught coming across the southern border from Sierra Leone. The GAO estimates that only 1 out of every 5 get caught, which means thousands have come here across the southern border. By the way, when you come illegally across the southern border, you're not getting screened by the TSA. It seems to me that the southern border is a little bit more than just immigration. It's about national security. So I do think it's perfectly appropriate that we could suspend those flights. I think that it's perfectly appropriate that we secure the southern border. And certainly, this is a threat that needs to be taken seriously. Now, does there need to be hysteria? The answer is no. There doesn't need to be hysteria. But the reality is that there are things that we expect from our government that are commonsensical. There have been 33 nations that have suspended visas from those 3 countries. I saw a report today in the Wall Street Journal. There was a model done from these 3 countries based on flights coming out of these 3 countries, that on average every month there will be 3 passengers affected with Ebola that depart every month from the 3 most affected countries. On average every month, based on the number of cases that are in these countries, there will be 3 people, and this comes from the Wall Street Journal. I can't remember the name of the agency that did the report, but that doesn't mean they're coming to the United States. It just means they're traveling on airplanes throughout the world, 3 people on average, based on the number of people that are there. I guess the answer is yes, there are things we should be doing. There are things that the American people expect. I would also suggest that when you look at the politicization of this, I have heard over and over again from people on the other side of the aisle, quite frankly, that it's Republican cuts that have caused this. It's Republican cuts to the CDC. It's Republican cuts to the National Institutes of Health. These are the causes of the United States government not being able to respond to this. And I want to be really clear here. 2014 budget was $6.9 billion for the CDC, $567 million more than it received in 2013, double the budget the CDC was getting in 2000, and more than $6.6 billion requested by the Obama administration. More than the $6.6 billion requested by the Obama administration. There's one other thing that I think people should be aware of. The CDC spent $2.8 million trying to figure out why lesbians are obese. They spent $466,000 on why obese girls struggle to find dates. They spent $2 million encouraging the elderly to join choirs. They spent $374,000 to put fruit and vegetable puppet shows on. And they spent $2.4 million developing origami contraception. But we're supposed to trust that the TSA is going to be able to screen Ebola coming off the airplanes. All right, next, can we do one more? One more. Why is it important for us to vote in this election? I heard that I've already covered it. I do think that this is an important point to pause, and I see people leaving, and there are also people coming in. That's okay. The important thing is this. I really believe that our nation is in peril. When you look at the fiscal crisis and what's happening in the world, we haven't even talked about Russia. Man, there's so much more to talk about. But our country is in peril, and we have to deal with it in very serious ways. And people are seeing that what is provocative in the world is not American strength. It is American weakness. And when you have a defense budget that is cut by $1 trillion and the president seemingly thinks it's okay, that's a problem. Russian aggression is a very severe threat. And oh, by the way, they're not just threatening Eastern Europe. They're threatening the entire world. People know what Vladimir Putin can do. He's invaded Georgia. He occupies South Ossetia and Abkhazia. He's got 80,000 troops in Armenia. He has cut energy in the dead of winter to the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And these countries, quite frankly, they need heat in the wintertime, and if they don't get it, people suffer and people die. You go down to Poland and the Czech Republic, these are two countries that were building a missile defense shield, had nothing to do with Russia whatsoever, had to do with Iran. The fact that Iran, the Parchin facility in Iran, which, by the way, is not part of the joint plan of action with the P5+1 negotiating in Iran. Parchin is a military facility in Iran where they were planning to test nuclear warheads that they denied existed until it was proven that it did exist, and now it's not any part of the JPA, but because of that, you had Poland and the Czech Republic saying, we're going to develop a missile defense shield. And if you remember, the Russian generals threatened nuclear war. They said, if you build that missile defense shield, we're going to have nuclear war, to which the president responded by meeting with Medvedev. And he said this, wait till my next election and I'll have more flexibility. And then he got elected, and he immediately scuttled the missile defense shield, to which Russia responded by giving Edward Snowden asylum. And if you want to know where our intelligence went in Iraq, the Iraqi, the folks destabilizing Iraq, ISIS, they now know how we're getting intelligence on them. That is what has enabled them to grow as much as anything else. And if you go down to Ukraine, it was back in 2005, December 31st, that Vladimir Putin said, you know what, we're going to cut your energy in the dead of winter, because they were wanting to join the European Union and do those kind of things. And guess what? Russia did it. People suffered, people died. And then over Thanksgiving of 2013, they were trying to once again sign an agreement for trade and social reform, political reform with the European Union. This was Ukraine, Yanukovych. And on our Thanksgiving Day, Vladimir Putin flew to Kiev, and he said to Yanukovych, if you sign that agreement, we're going to cut your energy in the dead of winter. By the way, this has happened before. Now it's going to happen again. It's Thanksgiving. It's going to get cold. Of course, it's not their Thanksgiving. It's our Thanksgiving, which, by the way, is a uniquely American holiday. Thank goodness. Once again, recognizing that our nation is established with God in mind. But here's the interesting dilemma. Yanukovych made the decision to align with Moscow, not because he wanted to, but because he wanted to keep heat for his people through the winter. His people said, we don't want to align with Moscow. They revolted. Russia took that as an excuse to invade and occupy Crimea. They have destabilized broader eastern Ukraine, and they are still occupying it. And the president's response in every situation is weakness. Friends, interestingly, if you go back to 2000, I think it was 2007, when the Russians invaded Georgia, they were bombing airports all over the place in Georgia, except one, the airport in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. You want to know why they didn't bomb Tbilisi? Because there was a United States of America C-17 aircraft sitting on the runway, and George W. Bush was president. I want to make this point abundantly clear. If you want to avoid war, you've got to have strength. Okay, so I'm going to close here. Number one, man, it's an honor to be here. We're going to close with a song, and I'm thrilled about it. I love Ernestine Dillard, but I want to share with you some thoughts. When I first got elected, there was a gentleman who helped me immensely. I mean, a lot. And when it was over, he came to me and he said, I will never ask you for a single thing. I will never lobby you. I will never, come and talk to you about anything that I want or anything that I need, except one thing. And I was like, well, goodness, what is it? He said, I want you to get your freshman newly elected members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike. And I want you to go down to Arlington National Cemetery and spend 1 hour. And we did that. We did it probably 5 months ago. And when you go down there, if just by hands, show me if you've been there. Will you raise your hand? That's amazing to see. You guys have all felt the same thing. You go down there and you spend time and you look around and you see row after row, hill after hill, mile after mile of grave sites with stars of David and crosses. 400,000 plus grave sites. And friends, that is only a small fraction of the total sacrifice that is given for this country. Somebody said one time, people here probably know who it was, I can't remember it offhand, but that the only thing that we ever ask for when we go to war in a foreign country is the land to bury our dead. And that is absolutely true of the United States of America. When I was down there, row after row, there was one grave site by a guy that died in World War I, Martin Treptow. He was on the front lines, and he got killed, and he had a diary on him. And in the diary was a quote, and it showed what he felt about his country. And this is what it said. America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. A couple of weeks ago, in fact, just last week, I was out in California visiting my old air wing. And I was visiting some old friends. And I was reminded that there is a whole nation of warfighters that feel exactly as Martin Treptow felt about his country. None of them want war. But all of them know that given the direction things are heading right now, it's going to get ugly. And what gives me confidence and what gives me encouragement is the fact that as Martin Treptow felt, he was willing to give everything he had, including his life for his country. As he felt that way about this generation feels that way about generations to come. And that gives me a great deal of hope. I'm going to close on this scripture. It's from Romans 8:38 and 39. And as things are bleak, this is a scripture that I would recommend people turn to. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.